Hey y'all, so I'm going to stitch a clip from, what is it, 154? That's the podcast. That's the podcast that I have seen Joanne Reed and the comedian Godfrey on, and I don't know the other gentleman that may have been on, that's on that podcast that has recurring appearances, because I don't really even know who's the true host of it, because I've only seen clips here and there, and I thought that it was supposed to be them talking about Africa, whereas I see them talking about foundational Black Americans or ethnic Black Americans. They talk more about Black Americans in the US than I hear from the other places. But then again, I'm not watching it religiously, so maybe they have a few clips here and there. So I'm going to stitch that together and let everybody see it. And I have some thoughts. And this is how I think. This is how we connect the dots between Black Americans and African immigrants or the other Blacks of the diaspora. Because remember, race, that's a social construct. All of us, the melanated folks, can say we're Black of some kind of Blackness, right? But when it comes to Black Americans, we're saying that it's our race and ethnicity. Joanne Reed, she has Congolese origins, so she may refer to herself as Congolese American, because if I'm not mistaken, I believe she was born here. Godfrey, he can call himself Nigerian American. So those two are true African Americans, right? Because they're first or second generation. I don't feel like trying to figure out which generation they are, but that's the point. Their parents took advantage of birthright citizenship from the 14th Amendment, and that is why they can say that they are that dash American, which we can actually put under the blanket cover of African American. That makes sense. And that is why people who say foundational Black Americans or ethnic Black Americans, as we are politically organizing so that we can, on that road to reparations, because we need to exclude others who don't have lineage. That doesn't mean we ain't got love for them, because I did enjoy some of the points that they made. And I have some thoughts on some of those points that they made, and we need to make some corrections. The first thing that they can do, though, stop calling us African American. They are African American. Call us Black American, ethnic Black American, foundational Black Americans. Refer to us as that. So let's do some relearning. Unlearn African American and now learn what we want to be called. Because she did mention that in this clip. So let's take a listen, okay?
There are three sort of sets of Black people that are in the diaspora. They're the Africans who were enslaved in their own home.
Yes.
You know, if you were Kikuyu or you were, a Xhosa person in South Africa, they enslaved your ass right there. And when they were done enslaving you, you got rid of them for the most part. They either left or they left behind their colonial system, but they colonized you in your own place where you live. Then you have the people who were stolen, and you either went to a country like Brazil or to the Caribbean, and so you experienced just horrific, degrading slavery, but that was about enslaving people and then using their bodies up and then letting them die and then going and getting more. And so you had a more holistically Black culture because you really maintained your Africanness in a lot of ways. And then when you died, they just went and got a different person. You weren't like being bred like cattle. Chattel slavery really only took place in the United States and Canada, but mainly, right? And so this is a different mentality. These people were told that slavery was endemic to being Black. The African Americans were sort of taught or told that just being Black or having any African ancestry meant that you were endemically a slave forever. That was not the case as much in the Caribbean or in Africa. They knew they had a 1,000-year-old culture in these African countries to fall back on to say, we're not endemically enslaved people. We don't come from slavery. Whereas in America, they try to cut them off from their Africanness and say the Africanness doesn't matter. You're just a slave. Your whole history is a slave. You never learn anything about what your ancestral origins were or what kingdoms you came from. You never learned that. You just learned slavery, 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 slavery. And so Black slavery in the U.S. was just unique. But the other thing I think that people who are from, like where our families are from, what they don't recognize is that that kind of slavery caused African Americans to produce, I would say, the most dominant cultural force that's ever lived.
And that's why we see it spread. That's why we see it spread everywhere.
It's everywhere, and it doesn't come. It comes from Africa endemically, right? The food, the rice, the dishes they eat, the oxtail, everything. There's an Africanness to it, but its origin story is America. And so they create this thing that is, up until a certain point, we didn't say African American when I was growing up. People would say, they used to say Negro, then they said African American, and Blacks kind of rejected that. The term that Black Americans like is Black.
They like Black.
And so because it rolls over.
Jesse brought up African American? Jesse Jackson.
Yeah, it was this idea of saying we're African, but in America. But African, when I was growing up, being African was not cool. Us little Africans. We got made fun of. So they were like, you African booty scratcher. African booty scratcher because African Americans trace their ancestry to Mississippi, to Alabama, to America. But what they did is they took, the 2,500 different indigenous groups in Africa. It's the most biodiverse continent on the planet. There's no more biodiversity anywhere like Africa. And so people who were in those ships came from like some people, my people Hausa, my father people are Hausa, some people are Igbo, some people are so we're Hausa people, right? So that's how we identify. You know what I mean? You take a Hausa person, an Igbo person, a Yoruba, and you throw them all in a ship. And they may speak each other's language or they may not, but they come from different tribes. You throw them all together, stick them in a slave ship, strip them of their identity. In a generation, they're not Hausa, they're not Igbo, they're not Yoruba, they're just Black. And so this culture of Blackness, of American Blackness, is powerful. It's a new tribe. It's a unique tribe, and we need to respect it.
There's some Africans that would say, you don't have a culture. Black Americans do. You got in mind?
Come
Because
on.
half of you copy it.
Copy it.
Everybody copies Black American
Yes.
culture.
Powerful,
Culture.
Because you said it's
You
powerful.
talked
There's
about-
something different than magnetic about it, you know?
It's
Like,
magnetic. It's
yeah.
a new tribe. They literally took out of many one. You want to talk about what's out of many one? It's all the, and look, they did the same with the white people, because white people were all different. They were, French, and they were German, they were Bavarian, they hated each other's guts, and they amalgamated them all into something called white. And then they amalgamated all of the blacks into something called black. They invented these things. These things didn't exist in the 16th century, and they're all false, they're not real, but they took away the thing that most humans organize themselves by, which is tribe. And that is gone in America. You're just white or you're black. And Black American culture is, again, it's the most dominant culture that's ever existed. It created rock and roll, soul music, country music, half the food we eat, most of what we do in this country that makes us American is Black people created it. And so I think when our people come from other countries, they need to give that some respect. They need to treat that with respect. But also, I wish American blacks could get the chance to learn what colonialism did to Africa. Because it's not like African people didn't suffer. And I think there's a sense that African people sold us away and forgot about us. But they forget those people were destroyed. As Michael Harriot said when we had him on for our Black History special, if Black people were selling other Black people, why did you need a fort? If this was a transaction that was mutual and the kings of Africa were just selling off black, well, then why did you need to build giant forts? You build giant forts as you were having wars with those kings who you were stealing their people. You wouldn't need a fort if you were selling and buying.
And that's something that people like. That's the information that gets passed out a lot. Your people sold.
They love to throw that out.
Yeah,
There,
like,
take the burden off them.
Yeah,
That's correct.
Yeah, because the history gets distorted that way, and it minimizes. And I've always been a person, and I know they trash me online, but I want to know, like, what is the connection point? Because you said it once that happened, it cut the connection. I literally physically saw it when you said that, almost like a cord being like, is there ever going to be a connection point between African immigrants and Black Americans?
It's already
happening
back
now.
Yeah.
It's happening now.
Yeah.
If you go to Ghana right now, you will see African Americans on every street. They're getting their residency, they're getting their citizenship, they're moving back, they're reinvesting. Africans, we reconnected the umbilical cord ourselves, and that's why you always talk about white people are bad. The 1619 Project was one of those moments where Black people said, no. We're going to recreate our own history. We're going to tell our own story, and that story does not mean that we come from slavery. We don't come from slavery. You all come from oppressing. You guys come from robbery and theft. You need to own that. But we are starting to tell our own story and reconnect ourselves to Africa and really invest in Africa and realize there's a huge bounty of human capacity, of financial capacity, and that together we're like the most powerful weapon on earth.
So what I want to say is that they make it seem like the transatlantic slave trade was them leaving Africa and coming straight to what's known as the mainland of the United States. When history tells us that they left the areas of Africa and they went to South America because it was a shorter distance. It's like when you look at the globe, look at the map, it's like a straight shot, right? Okay. They stayed there for 6 decades of stripping us. This is what we have been told. I don't know what they were told as far as Black American history, but for some reason they seem to think that it was from Africa to Plymouth Rock. No. 60 years, 6 decades of breeding and creating the Black American that didn't have any heritage, no ties. Children were being taken from their parents, their mothers, being bred the way the chattel slavery was. I'm in agreement with them with this. They describe chattel slavery from that clip. I'm in agreement there. But before we came back to what the mainland in the United States, this went on for 60 years. So I think they need to understand that to make it seem like our ancestry is only African. Let's not forget about the atrocities and the sexual assault throughout chattel slavery. Do not deny that there's native ancestry from the natives, the aboriginals, because they married into those tribes. They did that. Let's not forget about that, okay? Let's not forget about the European ancestry. This isn't us trying to be white. This is just us saying that's the reality of all of the mixes of our blood. So you're right, we are a new tribe, but this is not just a compilation of all African. So when you can acknowledge that we, the foundational Black Americans, ethnic Black Americans, don't just have African blood or ancestry, but European, because it could be Irish, it could be and then Native American, the people who are already here. Don't think it wasn't some dark ones that didn't get inside of this, that didn't get entangled and wrapped into chattel slavery. And that for generations and big scenes of all of this for hundreds of years, okay? So acknowledge that and stop trying to make it seem like that everything that we do, from our music to our food, is only connected to what is something in our genes that's saying we didn't have social media. There was no TikTok in the 1700s. There was no Facebook in the 1700s. How would we know? How would our ancestors know that what we are doing is a custom of you all's? And let's also remember that the people who got taken, some people got sold into chattel slavery, some were taken, and even the people who were interacting got betrayed in the end and probably snatched up, right? Because of how things are over there, tribes annihilated other tribes. You guys didn't even, those 54 countries you identify now, they weren't like that in the 1700s, 1600s, 1700s. They were not like that, right? Okay, now, keep that in mind too. And this is what we mean with you when you all speak like that. I don't think that you're realizing that you're trying to engulf us into you all. We don't want to be you all. We want to be us. And we can acknowledge that there are similarities. We have some similarities with some Asians too. Quiet as it's kept. The Latinx community, so come on. You are taking away from our culture when you deny the other groups that have influence on who we are. It's not just African. And I think that when you all can stop and do that and give some credit to some of the other races and ethnicities that contributed to Black culture and why we're the dominant leading force, it's not just because of you all. That is why it's giving you all need to feel great by claiming us to be you. Not saying, and that's the video that I made when we were talking about immigration in this country. That's the reason why. With you saying, no, you're not you, you're us. And that is what I'm getting from that. That's what I get from that. I don't like it. That is what I get from this take. And that's where you're going to miss us, because we have not connected. And let me tell you the last thing, to create that connection again, if even possible, between foundational Black Americans and ethnic Black Americans and the diaspora, whether African immigrants, wherever they're from. When you all stop trying to get reparations from our country and go after your colonizers, so they'll tell your homelands to go after the countries that colonized them, and stop trying to hijack our reparations movement here, African Union. Start there. That is how you can start to amend things. Stop trying to make more comments off of us and what our ancestors did to allow even for you all even be over here. So when you guys can stop that, we might be able to mess with y'all like that and trust y'all. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.